My video is live. All right, I was going to talk a little bit here about logic. Why it's not enough, why it's not really meant to be, how it really works, a kind of a better attitude to have about logic. And it's funny because I think some of the people that like trumpeting logic don't have as much interest as would seem natural in that case, if that's genuine, in the subtleties in the field of logic. You know, you got the internet and things. So, for example, logic only zone. Doesn't seem super interested in the subtleties of logic. He has this idea that all the fallacies are bad. And yet, so far his problem with me is like, well, that sounds reasonable. Why do you hang around with Inventive Harvest and Anaconda? Well, I enjoy talking to them. It's an open thing, but I'm glad that those two people have been coming. And it's just funny because guilt by association is a fallacy. So thinking there's something wrong with my ideas because I talk to people whose ideas you don't like, thinking my ideas are like theirs in ways that you would object to for the same reason you object to theirs, that's a fallacy. So this is kind of funny, isn't it? So the thing is, with logic, what do you need besides logic? Well, people always forget. Logic is about inference. So you take a set of principles, and if those principles are true, what else are the ramifications of that? Right? It's actually a way of judging principles. So if I take a few principles and I go, oh yeah, in genetics, and oh yeah, and this, and oh, okay, well, we should put people in concentration camps and force breed them. Well, my value system looks at that conclusion and goes, okay, there's something wrong here. Now, if I have faith in the logic, in the inference system, the beauty of the logic, with the logic is like a crystal, a magnifying glass. And it just showed me that these innocent looking principles have nefarious ramifications. And then I'm supposed to go, okay, thank you for magnifying that issue, logic. Now I have to use my value system to say I need some different principles because my principles lead to something that I'm against. So the conclusions of a logical argument are actually a way of judging the principles. So what do you use to judge the principles in that case? And it's a value system. And with a value system, the thing is you can use logic with your values, and you should. We can use logic with all of with emotions and thoughts. Logic is a tool that we now have available to us if we want to actually learn it. Not just the word logic, but learn these rules of inference and soundness and completeness, and learn these concepts. You can apply them very widely. And that includes to your values. You can say, well, I value this and not that, and this seems to cause that, which leads to a little of this and a little of that, but this lessens that. And so, you know, and you can say that to get to calculate what you think is an optimal situation based on your value judgments, you can use logic. But as you break down certain value judgments into their component parts, the things that motivate them, the things that argue, that can be used to argue for these higher level value judgments, as you break them down, you inevitably get to vanilla or chocolate. You know, if you want to use the pain spectrum, the pain space, or the annoyance space, it's like, do you prefer wearing scratchy clothes or being too hot? Which do you prefer less, rather? Right, so value systems are ultimately, you're going to be using logic to try to maximize your view of value. So what we do is we work on rules of inference, study them well, and see which kind of situations they deal with, which they don't deal with so well. And we discuss our value systems. Right? Some people look at a result and go, but there's going to be old people in the street. I don't like that. So you're telling me that some logical principles of how things should be done in a marketplace is going to lead to old people in the street, and it's just morally wrong. I'm talking about the libertarian argument to do anything about it. It's like, no, then we need some different principles, because that isn't an acceptable result. You have a logical argument that you want to found the economy on, and it leads to that, we got a problem. We need some new principles. This becomes a matter of engineering, conceptual engineering. So really, over the centuries, logic itself was also judged this way. Bad rules of inference, you can go back and go, oh, well, look, I did use this with logic and the principles must be wrong. You look at the principles like, no, these are good principles, and you could judge the system of logic, which is why one reason that there could be different systems of logic. There's different ways to do the calculation. For example, in modal logic, you don't say there exists an X for which blah, blah, blah is true. You say there's the possibility of something. It's about, it takes time into account, and sort of some things happen and some things don't. That in logic, we want to talk about possibilities. And first order logic doesn't do it. Another reason you have other logical systems is just because of obvious next steps. In your first with just simple predicates, what do they call them? But logic statements, A implies B, where there is no quantification. Then you go, well, let's make it so that we can have variables in here instead of just A implies B. How about F of A implies D of A, so we can have these objects that are passed through the predicates, and you variabilize over the objects. In second order logic, you variabilize in turn the next step over the predicates themselves. There's various ways to generate both logically consequent ideas of what to do with logic, and there are alternate domains that we want to apply to logic. So logic is a very useful tool, but you have to understand the realm in which even logic is being judged. Now, we have a pretty good logical system, thanks to philosophers arguing it out, and it is pretty reliable. So if you use first order logic for something that you can, for a problem for which it's possible to map it into first order logic, like, human relations can be very difficult. How are you going to model love in a first order logic? But for the many, many things that you can, it's going to work really well. And if the conclusion is absurd, then you have argued to absurdity, and that means the principles have a problem, right? So making a logical argument, hurrah, all you're doing is putting out on paper, conceptual and concept space, an assessment. You're saying if you believe these and you use this inference system, then you get these conclusions. And if there could be a problem in any part of that, and the development of sophisticated logics means that we know what kind of problems the logic can introduce, right? So that's an advantage. First order logic does have some issues. The first order conditional is not like the regular natural language conditional, but the effects of that are pretty well known. We've characterized them. Right, so meaning that we can apply that kind of system. We know when we can and make some judgments of it, whether it'll be apt or not. So what we're really usually worrying about then is we're looking at the conclusions and the principles. And if you're not a religious person, then you don't have some dogmatic faith in the principles and whatever the results. So there's an interesting one of the fallacies that's wrong. It's not a fallacy, the fallacy of consequentialism, that something is wrong because of its results. Well, yeah, in the time domain of human space and our lives and the way we interact with the world, actually bad consequences do mean bad principles, because it means that if a logical process has happened and something bad has happened, it means and you're saying it was properly logical, the inference is good. Something bad happened as a result, or had to happen, you can tell logically it had to happen as a result, then, okay, Sherlock, it's the principles. You worked from the wrong principles. like your principle of property, the principle of economy, all whatever the principles are, they are suspect. So coming up with the logical conclusion, maybe it means you're a good logician. It doesn't mean that conclusion is correct. And again, how are you going to judge whether you like the conclusion or not? Through a value system. So that's impossible. If you can't state it logically, well, no, there's inference systems for these other domains as well, but they're not as formalized, but you can't ignore them, right? So the Nazis can make a perfectly logical argument that they want to do some crazy Nazi shit, and it's like, there's got to be a problem with your principles. Maybe you can't actually create a utopia by being the worst motherfuckers on earth. Maybe that's where they went wrong. There's got to be a principle involved that all that logic came to such a negative conclusion. And some people would be like, well, no, we don't know that. We have to see the principles. What if that's the real conclusion? No, that can't be the real conclusion. See, I have a value system. I don't want that conclusion. There's no possible way that that you could convince me through some logical argument that conclusion has to happen, because I would just say the principles must be fucked up. The one exception of, in the flow of history, it seems that some tragedies became inevitable and then were an inevitable step for overcoming some cycle of spiraling into a constant state of catastrophe. All right, cheers.